The grand ballroom of Ashworth Manor fell silent as the young maid stepped forward, her hands moving in graceful patterns through the air. The Duke of Ravenscroft, known throughout London society as the deaf nobleman who had retreated from public life, stood motionless, his eyes fixed upon her delicate gestures. What began as a simple greeting transformed into something far more profound, a bridge between two isolated souls that would shatter the rigid conventions of Edwardian England. But the secret she carried, hidden beneath her modest uniform, would soon threaten to destroy them both. For in that frozen moment, as 300 aristocratic guests watched in stunned silence, neither could have imagined that her silent words would ignite a scandal that would echo through every drawing room from Mayfair to Yorkshire. Se você está escutando esta história, não esqueça de clicar no botão curtir. Inscreva-se no canal e me diga nos comentários de qual parte do mundo você está ouvindo esta história. Quero saber o quão longe ela viajou. Nora Ashford had learned the language of silence long before she understood the weight of her own voice. At 22, she moved through the corridors of Ashworth Manor with the practiced invisibility expected of a lady's maid. Her presence acknowledged only when required, dismissed when convenient. The manor itself stood as a testament to Old English wealth. 3 stories of honey-coloured stone overlooking the rolling hills of Gloucestershire, its windows reflecting the pale morning light that filtered through the ancient oaks lining the estate. Her mistress, Lady Charlotte Pemberton, was the manor's shining jewel, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her calculated ambition. Charlotte had secured an invitation to the most anticipated event of the 1908 social season, the Duke of Ravenscroft's return to society after 5 years of self-imposed exile. The Duke, William Thornbury, had lost his hearing in a riding accident that claimed his younger brother's life. Society whispered that he had become a recluse, bitter and unapproachable, buried in his vast estate in the north. Nora's mornings began before dawn, preparing Charlotte's elaborate wardrobe, arranging her hair in the latest fashions from Paris, ensuring every detail met the exacting standards of a woman determined to secure a titled husband. Charlotte's voice carried through the dressing room with sharp precision. "The Duke may be deaf, but he is not blind, Nora. Every woman in England will be vying for his attention. I must be flawless." "Yes, my lady," Nora replied softly, her fingers working through the intricate braiding Charlotte demanded. Charlotte studied her reflection with critical eyes. "They say he refuses to see anyone, that he communicates only through written notes with his steward. Imagine, a duke reduced to scribbling like a schoolboy. Still, his fortune is substantial, and his title is one of the oldest in England. A woman could overlook certain deficiencies for such a position." Nora remained silent, though something in Charlotte's dismissive tone stirred an unexpected discomfort in her chest. She had grown accustomed to her mistress's casual cruelty, the way Charlotte spoke of people as though they were merely pieces on a chessboard, valuable only for their utility. What Charlotte did not know, what no one at Ashworth Manor knew, was that Nora understood the language of the deaf. Her younger brother, Thomas, had lost his hearing to scarlet fever when he was 6 years old. Their mother, a seamstress in a small village outside Bath, had been too poor to afford special schools, so Nora had learned alongside Thomas, creating their own system of signs, later refined when a travelling missionary taught them the formal manual alphabet used in London's deaf institutions. Thomas had died 3 years ago from pneumonia, but Nora had never forgotten their silent conversations, the way his face would light up when she signed a joke or a story. The journey to Ravenscroft Hall took 2 days by train and carriage. The Duke's estate sprawled across the Yorkshire moors, a Gothic fortress of dark stone and towering turrets that seemed to emerge from the mist like something from a medieval legend. The annual charity ball, hosted to benefit the local parish, had been reinstated at the insistence of the Duke's aunt, Lady Beatrice Thornbury, a formidable woman who refused to allow her nephew to waste away in isolation. Nora's role at such events was to remain in the servants' quarters, ensuring Charlotte's gowns were pressed, her jewellery polished, her every need anticipated. But Lady Beatrice had made an unusual request of all visiting households. Any servant with knowledge of sign language was to be identified, as the Duke required assistance during the evening's festivities. When Charlotte learned of Nora's ability, her reaction was immediate and calculating. "You will stay close during the ball, but out of sight. If the Duke requires communication and I am nearby, you will interpret for me. Do you understand? This could be my opportunity to demonstrate compassion and understanding, qualities men find irresistible in a wife." The evening of the ball arrived with an unseasonable chill. Ravenscroft Hall blazed with candlelight, its grand ballroom filled with 300 guests dressed in silk and velvet, jewels glittering at throats and wrists. Nora stood in the shadows near the servants' entrance, wearing her best black dress with a crisp white apron, her dark blonde hair pinned severely beneath her cap. The Duke of Ravenscroft entered precisely at 9 o'clock. William Thornbury was 30 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched with premature silver at the temples. His face was striking, strong-jawed and serious, with deep-set grey eyes that seemed to observe everything while revealing nothing. He moved with careful deliberation, his gaze sweeping the room with an expression that Nora recognized immediately. The guarded wariness of someone who had learned to navigate a world not designed for him. Lady Beatrice stood at his side, her hand on his arm, guiding him through the initial greetings. The guests bowed and curtsied, their lips moving in pleasantries the Duke could not hear. He nodded politely, his responses limited to slight smiles that never reached his eyes. Charlotte positioned herself strategically near the refreshment table, her rose-colored gown cut daringly low, her practiced laugh carrying across the room. She had calculated every detail, every angle, waiting for the perfect moment to capture the Duke's attention. That moment came an hour into the evening, when Lady Beatrice guided her nephew toward a group of eligible young ladies, Charlotte among them. Nora watched from her shadowed corner as Charlotte curtsied deeply, her lips forming exaggerated words of greeting. The Duke's expression remained courteous but distant, his eyes already moving past her to the next introduction. Charlotte's frustration was visible only to someone who knew her well. She tried again, stepping closer, her hand reaching out to touch his sleeve. The Duke stiffened slightly, a flash of something, discomfort perhaps or irritation, crossing his features before he stepped back, creating distance. It was then that disaster struck. A servant, carrying a tray of champagne glasses, stumbled near the Duke, the tray tilting dangerously. The Duke, unable to hear the gasps of warning from the surrounding guests, stood directly in the path of the falling crystal. Without thinking, Nora darted forward from her corner, her hands moving in rapid, urgent signs. "Behind you! Move left!" The Duke's head snapped toward her, his eyes widening in shock. He stepped left immediately, and the tray crashed to the floor where he had been standing, glass shattering across the marble in a spectacular cascade. The ballroom fell silent, 300 pairs of eyes turning to stare at the young maid, whose hands were still raised in the air, frozen in the final gesture of her warning. William Thornbury stared at Nora as though she had appeared from thin air. Slowly, deliberately, his own hands moved in response. "You know the language." Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. She was acutely aware of every gaze upon her, of Charlotte's furious expression, of Lady Beatrice's surprised interest. But the Duke's eyes held hers with an intensity that made the rest of the room fade into insignificance. She nodded once, then signed, "Yes, Your Grace. I learned for my brother." Something shifted in the Duke's expression, the guarded walls lowering just slightly, revealing a glimpse of profound loneliness and unexpected hope. He signed again. "What is your name?" "Nora Ashford, Your Grace." Before she could sign anything further, Charlotte's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Nora, return to your place at once. Your Grace, please forgive my maid's presumption. She has overstepped terribly." But the Duke's attention did not waver from Nora's face. He signed a single question that would change everything. Will you stay? The ballroom remained suspended in that frozen moment, the shattered crystal on the floor glittering like scattered stars beneath the chandelier light. Nora's hands trembled as she stood before the Duke of Ravenscroft, acutely aware that she had violated every rule of her station. A maid did not speak unless spoken to. A maid did not draw attention to herself. A maid certainly did not engage in conversation with the Duke, while 300 members of the aristocracy watched in stunned silence. Lady Beatrice recovered first, her sharp eyes moving between her nephew and the young woman whose hands had spoken what no one else in the room could say. "William," she said clearly, knowing he could read her lips, "perhaps we should continue this conversation in a more private setting." But the Duke's focus remained fixed on Nora, and he signed again, more insistently, "Please, will you stay? I have not had a proper conversation in 5 years." The raw vulnerability in that admission, visible only to Nora through his signs, struck her deeply. She glanced toward Charlotte, whose face had transformed into a mask of barely controlled fury, then back to the Duke. Slowly, she signed, "I am here at my mistress's service, Your Grace. I cannot presume. I am asking you to presume." His signs were sharp, decisive. "Lady Beatrice, I require this woman's assistance for the remainder of the evening. Please make the necessary arrangements with her employer." The ballroom erupted in whispers. Charlotte's carefully constructed composure shattered like the crystal at their feet. She swept forward, her silk skirts rustling with indignation. "Your Grace, I must protest. Nora is my personal maid, and she has duties that cannot be neglected. Surely there are more appropriate individuals who could serve your needs." Lady Beatrice interrupted with the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Miss Pemberton, the Duke has made a request. I'm certain we can arrange for one of the housemaids to attend to your needs this evening." Her tone left no room for argument. Charlotte's eyes blazed with humiliation and rage, but she could not refuse a direct intervention from Lady Beatrice without causing a scene that would damage her own reputation. She curtsied stiffly. "Of course, Lady Beatrice, as you wish." Then her gaze cut to Nora, sharp as a knife. "We will discuss this later, Nora. I trust you understand the gravity of your position." The threat in those words was unmistakable. Nora's stomach twisted with dread, but the Duke was already gesturing for her to follow him toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the pressing crowd. Lady Beatrice moved with them, creating a small buffer of respectability, though nothing could stop the whispers that rippled through the assembled guests, like wind through wheat. For the next 2 hours, Nora stood beside the Duke of Ravenscroft, her hands translating the conversations of those who approached him, his responses flowing back through her voice. It was exhausting work, requiring complete concentration, but it was also extraordinary. She watched William Thornbury transform from the guarded, isolated figure who had entered the ballroom into someone more animated, more present. He discussed estate management with neighbouring landowners, debated agricultural innovations with a gentleman from Sussex, and even laughed, a rusty, unpracticed sound, at an anecdote about a runaway pig at the village fair. During a brief lull, he signed to her, "You have given me back the world tonight. I cannot adequately express what that means." Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I am glad to be of service, Your Grace. Tell me about your brother, the one you learned this for." The question was unexpected, personal in a way that crossed the vast social divide between them. Nora hesitated, then signed, "His name was Thomas. He lost his hearing to scarlet fever when he was 6. He died 3 years ago. He was 17. I am sorry." The Duke's signs were gentle, sincere. He was fortunate to have a sister who learned to speak with him. Most families abandon their deaf children to institutions or worse. "He was my best friend," Nora signed simply. "I could not imagine a world where we could not talk to each other." Something in William's expression softened further, a connection forming that went beyond the practical utility of communication. But before he could respond, Charlotte reappeared. Having clearly spent the intervening hours plotting her next move, she was accompanied by Lord Edmund Fairfax, a wealthy baron known for his conservative views and his vocal opinions on proper social hierarchy. Charlotte's voice was honey-sweet, but her eyes were cold. "Your Grace," Lord Fairfax was just expressing his concern about the rather unusual arrangement this evening. "We both feel it is our duty to address a matter of some delicacy." Lord Fairfax puffed out his chest importantly. "Your Grace, while we all sympathize with your condition, it is highly irregular to elevate a servant to such a prominent position. It sets a dangerous precedent and, frankly, it makes the other guests uncomfortable. There are proper channels for such things, professional interpreters, educated individuals of appropriate standing." Nora's hands stilled. She felt the weight of every gaze in the ballroom, turning toward them once more, felt the judgment and disapproval radiating from the assembled aristocracy. She was a curiosity, an oddity, a servant who had forgotten her place. The Duke's jaw tightened. He signed to Nora. "Tell them that Miss Ashford has provided an invaluable service this evening, and I am grateful for her assistance." Nora translated, her voice steady despite the churning anxiety in her stomach. Charlotte pressed forward, sensing an opening. "Of course, Your Grace, and we are all pleased that you have been made comfortable. But surely you can see how this appears. A young, unmarried woman of no consequence, standing at your side all evening as though she were your equal? It reflects poorly on your judgment and on the dignity of your title. People are talking, Your Grace. They are questioning your discernment." The cruelty of the attack was breathtaking. Charlotte was not merely criticizing the arrangement, she was publicly questioning the Duke's mental competence, using his deafness as a weapon to undermine his authority. Nora saw the impact of the words in the tightening of William's shoulders, the flash of old pain in his eyes. Lord Fairfax nodded sagely. "Miss Pemberton speaks wisely, Your Grace. Perhaps it would be best if the girl returned to her proper duties. I'm certain Lady Beatrice can arrange for more suitable accommodations for your needs in the future." The ballroom had fallen silent again, waiting for the Duke's response. Nora wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and escape the humiliation of being discussed as though she were not standing right there. But William's hand caught her wrist gently, holding her in place. He signed rapidly. "What are they saying?" "All of it. Do not soften it." Nora translated Charlotte's words exactly, including the implications about his judgment and competence. She watched anger flash across his features, followed by something harder, more calculating. He released her wrist and turned to face Charlotte and Lord Fairfax directly. When he spoke aloud, his voice was rusty from disuse, but clear and commanding. "Miss Pemberton, Lord Fairfax, I appreciate your concern for propriety. However, I'm quite capable of determining what is appropriate within my own home. Miss Ashford has demonstrated more genuine courtesy and intelligence in 2 hours than most of the guests here have shown in 5 years. If society finds that uncomfortable, perhaps society needs to examine its own values." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of shock spreading through the crowd. Charlotte's face flushed crimson, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. "Your Grace, I only meant—" "I know precisely what you meant, Miss Pemberton." William's voice was cold now. "You meant to elevate yourself by diminishing another. You meant to use my disability as leverage for your own social climbing. I may be deaf, but I am not blind, and I am certainly not stupid." The silence that followed was absolute. Charlotte stood frozen, her humiliation complete and public. Lord Fairfax had gone pale, clearly regretting his involvement. Lady Beatrice watched her nephew with undisguised pride. Then Charlotte's gaze turned to Nora, and the hatred there was so pure, so venomous, that Nora took an involuntary step backward. "This is your fault," Charlotte hissed, her voice low enough that only Nora could hear. "You have ruined everything. When we return to Ashworth Manor, you will pay for this humiliation. I will ensure you never work in a respectable house again. I will destroy you." Before Nora could respond, Charlotte turned and swept from the ballroom, her exit marked by the whispers that followed in her wake. Lord Fairfax made a hasty excuse and retreated as well, leaving Nora standing beside the Duke, her heart pounding with the terrible certainty that her life had just irrevocably changed. William signed to her. "What did she say to you? Just now?" Nora hesitated, then signed honestly. "She said she would destroy me for this." The Duke's expression darkened. He signed, "She will not touch you. I give you my word." But even as Nora nodded, she knew that a duke's word, however well-intentioned, could not protect a maid from the vindictive wrath of a humiliated aristocrat. The golden cage of her service had just transformed into a trap, and she could see no way out that did not end in her complete ruin. The journey back to Ashworth Manor was a descent into silent dread. Charlotte did not speak a single word to Nora during the 2-day trip, but her fury radiated like heat from a forge. She communicated through icy glares and deliberate coldness, ensuring that every servant in their traveling party understood that Nora had fallen from whatever minimal grace she had once possessed. Upon their return, Charlotte's revenge was swift and calculated. She went directly to Lady Ashworth, the mistress of the manor and Charlotte's distant cousin, with a carefully constructed tale of Nora's presumption and inappropriate behavior at Ravenscroft Hall. Within an hour of their arrival, Nora was summoned to Lady Ashworth's study. Lady Ashworth was a woman in her 60s, her face lined with the severity of someone who had spent a lifetime enforcing social hierarchies. She regarded Nora with cold disapproval. "Miss Pemberton has informed me that you overstepped your position at the Duke's ball, drawing unseemly attention to yourself and embarrassing your mistress. Is this true?" Nora kept her eyes lowered. "I was asked by the Duke to provide translation services, my lady. I did not seek the attention. That is irrelevant. A proper servant knows how to decline such requests gracefully, redirecting to more appropriate channels. Instead, you made yourself the center of a spectacle. Miss Pemberton has requested your immediate dismissal, and I am inclined to agree. However," Lady Ashworth paused, her expression calculating, "you have served this household adequately for 3 years, and I am not entirely without mercy. I will give you a choice. You may leave immediately with 1 month's wages and no reference, or you may stay for 2 more weeks to train your replacement, after which you will leave with 3 months' wages and a neutral reference stating only your dates of service. Either way, you are no longer welcome at Ashworth Manor." The words struck like physical blows. Without a reference, Nora would be unable to secure another position in service. With only a neutral reference, her prospects would be severely limited, but 3 months' wages would give her time to find some other form of employment, perhaps in a shop or a factory, though such work paid far less and offered no security. "I will stay the 2 weeks, my lady," Nora said quietly. "Thank you for your mercy." Lady Ashworth waved a dismissive hand. "You will work in the laundry during this time. Miss Pemberton does not wish to see you again. You are dismissed." The next 2 weeks were the longest of Nora's life. She worked in the steaming heat of the laundry from dawn until late evening, her hands raw from lye soap, her back aching from the endless scrubbing and wringing. The other servants, sensing her fall from favor, avoided her, fearful that association with her might taint their own positions. She ate alone, slept in a narrow cot in the laundry room rather than the servants' quarters, and counted the days until her exile would be complete. On her final day at Ashworth Manor, as she was packing her few belongings into a worn carpet bag, one of the younger maids slipped into the laundry room with a nervous expression. "Miss Ashford, there's a letter for you. It came by special messenger this morning. Mrs. Henshaw told me to burn it, but I thought, well, it seemed wrong not to give it to you." The girl pressed a cream-colored envelope into Nora's hands and fled before she could be seen. Nora stared at the envelope, her heart beginning to pound. The paper was expensive, heavy, and sealed with dark blue wax impressed with a coat of arms she recognized, the Thornbury family crest. With trembling fingers, She broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was bold and clear. "Dear Miss Ashford, I have learned through my aunt's correspondence of your dismissal from Ashworth Manor. I'm writing to offer you a position at Ravenscroft Hall as my personal interpreter and assistant. The salary would be $60 per annum, with full room and board, and 2 weeks' holiday per year. This is more than double what you earned as a lady's maid, and the position would be permanent, contingent upon your satisfactory performance. I realize this offer may seem unusual, but I assure you it is made in complete sincerity and with the full support of Lady Beatrice. Since the ball, I have come to understand how much I have lost by isolating myself from the world. You gave me a glimpse of what life could be if I had someone who could bridge the silence. I am hoping you might consider accepting this position. If you are agreeable, a carriage will be waiting at the King's Cross station in London on the 15th of June at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The driver will be holding a sign with your name. The journey to Yorkshire takes approximately 6 hours. If you do not appear, I will understand that you have chosen a different path, and I will not trouble you further. Respectfully, William Thornbury, Duke of Ravenscroft." Nora read the letter 3 times, her mind reeling. £60 per annum was an extraordinary sum for someone of her station. More than many governesses earned, nearly what a skilled housekeeper might make. But more than the money, it was the tone of the letter that struck her. Respectful, almost tentative, as though the Duke genuinely feared she might refuse. The date mentioned was tomorrow. She had less than 24 hours to decide whether to accept this offer or to return to her mother's cottage in Bath and search for whatever work she could find in that small city. The practical choice was obvious. The Duke's offer represented security, good wages, and a position that would use her unique skills. But accepting meant entering a world far above her station, becoming a permanent fixture in an aristocratic household where she would be neither servant nor equal, occupying an ambiguous space that would invite gossip and judgment. That evening, Nora walked through the grounds of Ashworth Manor one final time, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. She thought of Thomas, of the way his face had lit up when she signed stories to him, of the connection they had shared through their silent language. She thought of the Duke's expression when she had warned him about the falling tray, the way 5 years of isolation had seemed to crack open in that single moment of understanding. She thought of Charlotte's venomous promise to destroy her, and of Lady Ashworth's cold dismissal. She thought of the laundry room, the scalding water, the raw skin on her hands, and the knowledge that this was likely the best she could hope for if she remained within the traditional boundaries of her class. By the time the sun had set, Nora had made her decision. The next afternoon she stood on the platform at King's Cross Station, her carpet bag clutched in one hand, her heart hammering with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The station was chaos, steam hissing from engines, porters shouting, passengers rushing in all directions. She scanned the crowd, searching for the sign the Duke had mentioned. There, a tall man in livery stood near the entrance, holding a placard that read Miss N. Ashford in neat letters. Nora approached him, her voice barely audible over the noise. "I am Nora Ashford." The man's stern expression softened slightly. "Miss Ashford, I am Graves, the Duke's head coachman. His Grace will be pleased that you have come. The carriage is this way." The journey north was long but comfortable. The carriage was well appointed, with cushioned seats and windows that offered views of the changing landscape as they left London behind. Graves proved to be a taciturn companion, but he answered Nora's nervous questions about Ravenscroft Hall with patient courtesy. "The household is smaller than most ducal estates," he explained. "His Grace prefers a more modest staff. There are perhaps 30 servants in total, including the groundskeepers and stable hands. Lady Beatrice manages the household, as His Grace never married. You'll find her fair but exacting. She has high standards." "And the other servants?" Nora asked. "How will they receive me? My position is unusual." Graves considered this. "There will be talk, certainly. But Lady Beatrice has made it clear that you are to be treated with respect. His Grace has been different since the ball. More engaged. The staff has noticed. They're hopeful that your presence might help him rejoin the world. That will count in your favour. They arrived at Ravenscroft Hall as twilight was falling, the Gothic towers silhouetted against a sky streaked with purple and gold. Lady Beatrice herself met Nora at the entrance, her sharp eyes assessing the young woman before her. "Miss Ashford, welcome to Ravenscroft Hall. I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Yes, my lady, thank you." "Good. Come with me. We have much to discuss." Lady Beatrice led Nora through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, finally arriving at a comfortable sitting room where a fire crackled in the hearth. She gestured for Nora to sit, a gesture that would have been unthinkable from Lady Ashworth. "I will be direct with you, Miss Ashford. My nephew has been lost to us for 5 years. The accident that took his hearing also took his brother's life, and William has carried that guilt like a stone around his neck. He has refused every attempt to draw him back into society, every suggestion that he might find ways to communicate, every offer of help, until you. I do not know what you did at that ball, but you reached him in a way no one else has managed. For that alone, I am grateful." Nora listened, her hands folded in her lap, unsure how to respond. Lady Beatrice continued, "Your position here will be unique. You will not be a servant in the traditional sense, nor will you be a guest. You will be my nephew's bridge to the world, and that is a role of considerable importance. You will take your meals with the upper staff, the housekeeper, the butler, the head cook. You will have your own room in the East Wing, near the family quarters. You will be expected to accompany His Grace to social functions, estate meetings, and any other occasions where communication is required. Do you understand?" "I believe so, my lady. There is one more thing." Lady Beatrice's expression grew more serious. "There will be gossip. There will be those who question the propriety of this arrangement, who will suggest unseemly motivations on either your part or William's. You must conduct yourself with absolute propriety at all times. Any hint of scandal, and I will have no choice but to terminate your employment, regardless of my nephew's wishes. Am I clear?" "Perfectly clear, my lady." "Good. Now William is waiting in the library. He has been quite anxious about whether you would come. Shall we go see him?" Nora's heart leapt into her throat, but she nodded and followed Lady Beatrice through more corridors until they reached a set of double doors. Lady Beatrice knocked once, then opened them to reveal a vast library, its walls lined with books from floor to ceiling, a fire burning in a massive stone fireplace. The Duke of Ravenscroft stood by the window, his back to them, his posture tense. When he turned and saw Nora, his entire expression transformed, relief, joy, and something deeper that made her breath catch. He signed, "You came." Nora signed back, "I came." The first 3 months at Ravenscroft Hall passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. Nora's days developed a rhythm that was entirely unlike her previous life in service. She rose at 7, breakfasted with the upper staff, and then spent her mornings with the Duke, translating correspondence from his steward, interpreting meetings with tenants and estate managers, and occasionally simply conversing. Long, rambling discussions about books, politics, agriculture, and philosophy that left her mind spinning with ideas she had never before had the opportunity to explore. William Thornbury, she discovered, was a man of considerable intellect and unexpected humour. Freed from the isolation that had defined his existence for 5 years, he seemed to unfold like a plant reaching toward sunlight. He taught her the finer points of estate management, explaining crop rotation and livestock breeding with the same enthusiasm he brought to debates about parliamentary reform or the latest scientific discoveries. He had a library that rivaled some university collections, and he encouraged Nora to borrow any books that interested her. "You have a quick mind," he signed to her one afternoon as they sat in the library reviewing accounts. "Have you ever considered formal education?" Nora looked up from the ledger she had been studying, surprised. Women of my class do not receive formal education, Your Grace. I learned to read and write from my mother, who was taught by the vicar's wife. That is more than most in my position can claim. That is society's loss, William signed firmly. Intelligence is not the province of any particular class. I have met titled lords with less sense than my stable master, and servants with more wisdom than half of Parliament. It was this quality, his willingness to see people as individuals rather than representatives of their class, that made Nora's admiration for him deepen into something more complicated, something she tried desperately to ignore. She was acutely aware of the vast gulf between them, of the impossibility of any relationship beyond the professional. She was his employee, his interpreter, nothing more. But there were moments, fleeting, dangerous moments, when she caught him watching her with an expression that suggested his thoughts might be traveling down similarly forbidden paths. The way his hand would linger when he helped her into the carriage, the way his signs would soften when he thanked her at the end of a long day, the way he smiled when she made him laugh, a genuine, unguarded expression that transformed his serious features into something almost boyish. Lady Beatrice noticed, of course. She was far too observant to miss the subtle shifts in her nephew's demeanour, the way his mood brightened whenever Nora entered a room. One evening she summoned Nora to her private sitting room. "Sit down, Miss Ashford. We need to have a frank conversation." Nora sat, her stomach knotting with apprehension. Lady Beatrice studied her for a long moment. "My nephew is happier than I have seen him in years. The entire household has remarked upon it. He laughs now. He engages with his responsibilities. He has even begun accepting social invitations again. This is largely due to your presence. I am glad to be of service, my lady." "I'm sure you are, but I am not blind, Miss Ashford, and neither should you be. William is developing feelings for you that go beyond professional appreciation. And if I am not mistaken, you are not entirely indifferent to him either." Nora's face burned. "My lady, I would never presume—" Lady Beatrice held up a hand. "I am not accusing you of impropriety. I am simply stating facts. The question is what we do about those facts. William is a duke. He has responsibilities to his title, his estate, and his family line. Society expects him to marry a woman of appropriate rank and produce heirs. A relationship with you, no matter how genuine the affection, would be seen as scandalous at best, ruinous at worst." The words struck like blows, even though Nora had thought them herself 100 times. "I understand, my lady. I will maintain appropriate distance." "Will you?" Lady Beatrice's tone was not unkind, but it was skeptical. "Can you control your heart through sheer force of will? Can he? I have watched my nephew fight against his isolation for 5 years, and I will not see him retreat back into that darkness. But neither will I stand by and watch him destroy his reputation and his future for a love that society will never accept." Nora felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "What would you have me do, my lady?" Lady Beatrice sighed. "I don't know, child. I truly don't know. For now, continue as you are, but guard your heart and help him guard his. The world is not kind to those who defy its rules." The conversation haunted Nora for days afterward. She tried to maintain a more formal distance from William, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. Their work required constant proximity, constant communication, and the connection between them only deepened with each passing day. The crisis came in early October, when Lady Beatrice announced that she was hosting a weekend house party at Ravenscroft Hall. "It is time for William to fully rejoin society," she declared. "I have invited several families of good standing, including some eligible young ladies who might make suitable matches." William's expression, when Lady Beatrice informed him of this plan, was one of resignation mixed with dread. He signed to Nora later, in the privacy of the library. "She means well. She wants to see me settled, married, producing heirs like a good duke should. But the thought of making polite conversation with women who see me as a title and a fortune rather than a person is exhausting." "Perhaps you will be surprised," Nora signed, though her heart ached at the thought of him courting other women. "Perhaps one of them will be different." "Perhaps," he signed, but his expression was doubtful. The house party began on a Friday evening in mid-October. The guests arrived in a procession of elegant carriages, Lord and Lady Hartwell with their daughter Penelope, a beautiful blonde with an impressive dowry, Sir Richard and Lady Ashford with their niece Beatrice, no relation to Lady Beatrice Thornbury, a quiet brunette with a reputation for charitable works, and Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood with their daughter Rosalind, a vivacious redhead known for her wit and her skill at the pianoforte. Nora's role during the party was to remain available but unobtrusive, translating when necessary, but otherwise allowing the Duke to interact with his guests as naturally as possible. She watched from the periphery as William made polite conversation with the young ladies, his signs translated by Nora's voice, their responses read from their lips. Penelope Hartwell was pleasant but vapid, her conversation limited to fashion and gossip. Beatrice Ashford was kind, but painfully shy, barely able to meet William's eyes. Rosalind Blackwood was the most promising, intelligent, well-read, and genuinely interested in the Duke's work with his estate. Nora watched William's expression warm slightly as Rosalind discussed a recent article on agricultural reform and felt a sharp stab of jealousy that she had no right to feel. The weekend progressed with the usual activities: a formal dinner, a morning ride through the estate, an afternoon of cards and conversation. Nora performed her duties mechanically, translating, interpreting, facilitating, all while maintaining the neutral expression expected of someone in her position. It was on the final evening, during a musical performance in the drawing room, that everything changed. Rosalind Blackwood was playing the pianoforte, her fingers dancing across the keys in a complex Chopin nocturne. The other guests sat in appreciative silence, but William stood near the window, his back to the room, his posture tense. Nora approached him quietly and signed, "Are you well, Your Grace?" He turned to her, and the expression on his face was one of profound frustration. "I cannot hear it," he signed. "Everyone is moved by the music, and I cannot hear a single note. I can see her fingers moving, see the concentration on her face, but the music itself is lost to me. It is like watching a conversation through a window. I can see the shapes of the words but cannot grasp their meaning." Without thinking, Nora reached out and took his hand, placing it gently on the side of the piano. "Feel it," she signed with her free hand. "The vibrations. Close your eyes and feel the music through the wood." William looked skeptical, but did as she suggested. Nora watched his expression shift as he felt the resonance of the instrument through his palm, the way the different notes created different patterns of vibration. It was not the same as hearing, but it was something, a connection to the music that he had thought forever lost. When the piece ended and the guests applauded, William opened his eyes and looked at Nora with an intensity that made her breath catch. He signed, "You understand. You truly understand what it is to live in silence, to find ways to bridge the gap between my world and theirs. None of these women, no matter how kind or accomplished, can give me that." "Your Grace!" Nora began to sign, but he interrupted. "William, when we are alone, please call me William." It was a request that crossed every line of propriety, that acknowledged the connection between them in a way that could not be taken back. Nora knew she should refuse, should maintain the professional distance that Lady Beatrice had warned her about. But standing there in the firelight, his hand still resting on the piano, his eyes holding hers with such raw honesty, she found she could not deny him. "William," she signed, and watched something in his expression kindle like a flame catching. The moment was interrupted by Lady Beatrice's voice. "William, Miss Blackwood was asking about your library. Perhaps you might give her a tour." The spell broke. William stepped back, his expression shuttering into polite courtesy. "Of course, Aunt Beatrice." He offered his arm to Rosalind Blackwood, and Nora followed at a respectful distance, her heart hammering against her ribs. But as they walked through the corridors toward the library, Nora caught sight of a familiar figure standing in the entrance hall, newly arrived and removing her traveling cloak. Charlotte Pemberton had come to Ravenscroft Hall, and the expression on her face when she saw Nora was one of pure, calculating malice. The rivalry that had begun at the Duke's ball was about to enter a new and dangerous phase. Charlotte Pemberton's arrival at Ravenscroft Hall was no accident. She had spent the months since the disastrous ball cultivating a friendship with Rosalind Blackwood's mother, angling for an invitation to the house party through sheer persistence and strategic flattery. Her stated purpose was to renew her acquaintance with the Duke and to apologize for any misunderstanding that might have occurred during their previous encounter. Her actual purpose was far more sinister. Lady Beatrice received Charlotte with cool courtesy, though her sharp eyes missed nothing of the younger woman's calculating expression. "Miss Pemberton, what an unexpected pleasure. I was not aware you were acquainted with the Blackwoods." "Mrs. Blackwood and I have become quite close in recent months," Charlotte replied smoothly. "When she mentioned the house party, I expressed my hope of seeing Ravenscroft Hall again, and she was kind enough to extend an invitation. I do hope my presence is not an imposition." "Not at all," Lady Beatrice said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "You have arrived just in time for dinner. I will have Mrs. Crawford show you to your room." Charlotte's gaze swept the entrance hall and landed on Nora, who stood frozen near the library door. Their eyes met, and Charlotte's smile was sharp as a blade. "Miss Ashford, how delightful to see you again. I had heard rumors that you had found employment here, but I scarcely believed them. How extraordinary that a former lady's maid should rise to such prominence." The words were honeyed poison, designed to remind everyone present of Nora's inferior status. Rosalind Blackwood looked confused, glancing between Charlotte and Nora. "You know each other?" "Oh, yes," Charlotte said. "Miss Ashford was my personal maid until recently. She left my service under rather unfortunate circumstances, but I bear no grudge. I am simply amazed at her good fortune in securing such an unusual position." William, who had been observing this exchange with growing tension, signed to Nora. "What is she saying? I can read her lips, but I want to know your interpretation." Nora translated faithfully, watching William's expression darken. He turned to Charlotte and spoke aloud, his voice cold. "Miss Ashford's previous employment is irrelevant to her current position. She serves as my interpreter and assistant, and she does so with exceptional skill and professionalism. I would appreciate it if you would extend her the courtesy she deserves." Charlotte's smile never wavered, but her eyes glittered with malice. "Of course, Your Grace. I meant no disrespect. I am simply concerned for your reputation. There has been talk in London about the unusual arrangement here at Ravenscroft Hall. Some people question whether it is entirely proper for a young unmarried woman of Miss Ashford's background to occupy such an intimate position in your household." Lady Beatrice intervened before William could respond. "Miss Pemberton, I believe you will find that the arrangements at Ravenscroft Hall are beyond reproach. Miss Ashford's conduct has been exemplary, and any gossip to the contrary is the product of small minds with nothing better to occupy their time. Now, if you will excuse us, we were about to give Miss Blackwood a tour of the library." Charlotte curtsied, her expression one of false contrition, but as the group moved toward the library, she caught Nora's arm in a grip that was just short of painful. "We need to talk," she hissed, "privately. Tonight, after dinner. The Rose Garden at 10 o'clock. If you do not come, I will make a scene at dinner that will destroy whatever reputation you have managed to build here. Do you understand?" Nora nodded mutely, and Charlotte released her, sweeping away toward the stairs with Mrs. Crawford. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of anxiety. Nora performed her duties mechanically, translating dinner conversation, interpreting the after-dinner discussions in the drawing room, all while watching the clock creep toward 10. William noticed her distraction and signed to her during a lull. "Are you well? You seem troubled." "I am fine," she signed back, but the lie felt heavy on her hands. At 10 o'clock, Nora slipped out of the house through a side door and made her way to the rose garden. The night was cold, the first frost of autumn glittering on the grass. Charlotte was already there, pacing among the dormant rose bushes, her breath misting in the chill air. "So, you came," Charlotte said. "I wasn't certain you would have the courage." "What do you want, Charlotte?" Nora asked, too tired for pretense. "I want you to leave Ravenscroft Hall. I want you to disappear from the Duke's life and never return. You have no right to the position you occupy, no right to his attention or his regard. You are a servant, Nora, a nobody, and yet you have somehow managed to insinuate yourself into a situation that should be mine." "I have done nothing wrong," Nora said quietly. "I perform the duties I was hired to perform, nothing more. Don't lie to me. I have eyes. I can see the way he looks at you, the way you look at him. You think you can have him, don't you? You think your little sign language trick makes you special, makes you worthy of a duke's affection, but you are deluding yourself. He will never marry you. Society would never accept it. His family would disown him. You would destroy him." The words struck at Nora's deepest fears, the doubts she'd been trying to suppress for months. "I have no expectations of marriage," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know my place." "Do you? Then prove it. Leave. Take your savings and go. I will even help you. I will give you £50, enough to start a new life somewhere far from here. You can open a shop, find respectable work, make something of yourself without clinging to a man who can never truly be yours." And if I refuse?" Charlotte's expression hardened. "Then I will make your life here impossible. I will spread rumors about improper conduct. I will suggest to Lady Beatrice that you have been taking advantage of the Duke's isolation to manipulate him for your own gain. I will write letters to every influential family in England, detailing the scandalous arrangement at Ravenscroft Hall. By the time I am finished, the Duke will have no choice but to dismiss you to protect his own reputation. And you will leave with nothing, no reference, no savings, no prospects. Which option sounds preferable?" Nora stared at Charlotte, seeing the desperation beneath the malice. "You cannot have him through threats and manipulation, Charlotte. That is not how love works." "Love?" Charlotte laughed bitterly. "This has nothing to do with love. This is about position, about security, about claiming what should have been mine from the beginning. The Duke is wealthy, titled, and in need of a wife. I'm beautiful, well-connected, and available. It is a perfect match, or it would be if you were not in the way. I am not in the way. The Duke has no interest in you, Charlotte. He made that clear at the ball. Because you poisoned him against me. You translated my words, but you added your own interpretations, your own biases. You made me look cruel and calculating. I translated exactly what you said. If you appeared cruel and calculating, it is because that is what you are." Charlotte's hand lashed out, striking Nora across the face with enough force to snap her head to the side. "How dare you speak to me that way? I am your better in every way that matters. I will not be lectured by a servant about morality or conduct." Nora touched her stinging cheek, tasting blood where her lip had split against her teeth, but she did not back down. "You are not my better, Charlotte. You are simply someone who was born with more privilege. That does not make you wiser, kinder, or more deserving of happiness. I will not leave Ravenscroft Hall because you demand it. If the Duke wishes me to go, I will go. But that decision is his to make, not yours." "Then you have sealed your fate," Charlotte said coldly. "I will destroy you, Nora Ashford. I will make you regret the day you ever learned to move your hands in that ridiculous language." Charlotte turned and swept back toward the house, leaving Nora standing alone in the frost-covered garden, her face throbbing, her heart heavy with the certainty that the confrontation was far from over. She returned to the house through the side door, intending to slip up to her room unnoticed, but she found William waiting in the corridor, his expression dark with concern. He signed immediately. "Where have you been? I saw you leave, and then I saw Miss Pemberton follow you." "What happened?" Nora's hands trembled as she signed, "Nothing of consequence. A private conversation." William stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he saw her split lip in the lamplight. She struck you. It was not a question. His hands moved with sharp, angry gestures. That woman struck you, and you are telling me it is nothing of consequence? Please, William, do not make this worse. She is a guest in your home. If you confront her, it will only create scandal. I do not care about scandal. His signs were fierce, emphatic. I care that someone hurt you and you are protecting them. Why? What hold does she have over you? Nora hesitated, then signed honestly. She threatened to spread rumors about improper conduct between us. She said she would write letters to influential families, that she would force you to dismiss me to protect your reputation. She wants me to leave Ravenscroft Hall. William's expression shifted through a series of emotions, anger, frustration, and finally something that looked like determination. Come with me, he signed. Now. He led her through the corridors to the library, closing the doors firmly behind them. The fire had burned down to embers, casting the room in shadows. William lit several lamps, then turned to face her, his hands moving with careful deliberation. I have tried to be patient. I have tried to respect the boundaries of propriety, to maintain appropriate distance, but I can no longer pretend that my feelings for you are merely professional appreciation. I can no longer stand by and watch people like Charlotte Pemberton treat you as though you are beneath consideration simply because of the circumstances of your birth. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. William, please do not say things that cannot be unsaid. Why not? Because society will disapprove? Because my aunt will worry about scandal? Because Charlotte Pemberton will spread malicious gossip? I have spent 5 years living in fear of society's judgment, isolating myself because I was afraid of being seen as defective, as less than whole. You showed me that I was wrong, that my deafness does not define my worth. How can I ask you to accept that truth while simultaneously allowing society to define your worth by your class? It is different, Nora signed desperately. Your deafness is not a choice. My class is a fact of birth that cannot be changed. Cannot be changed, or should not be challenged. William's signs were passionate now, his usual reserve completely abandoned. I am a duke, Nora. I have wealth, title, and influence. If I choose to marry a woman of lower social standing, society will gossip and clutch their pearls, but they will ultimately accept it because they have no choice. I am not asking for your permission to court you. I am telling you that I intend to do so, and that I desperately hope, that you feel even a fraction of what I feel for you. Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks. I do. I have tried not to, tried to maintain proper distance, but I do. I love you, William. But loving you and being able to build a life with you are two different things. Your aunt was right. You have responsibilities to your title, your estate, your family line. You need to marry someone who can navigate society, who can host grand dinners and manage a ducal household, who can give you heirs without the taint of scandal. I cannot be that person. I do not want that person. I want you. William closed the distance between them, his hands gentle as they framed her face, careful of her injured lip. I want someone who sees me as William, not as the Duke of Ravenscroft. I want someone who understands silence and has learned to find beauty in it. I want someone whose intelligence and courage humble me daily. I want you, Nora Ashford, with all the complications and challenges that choice entails. And if society rejects us, if your family disowns you, if the scandal damages your ability to manage your estate and help your tenants, then we will face those challenges together. But I refuse to live my life according to the dictates of people who value title over character, wealth over kindness, propriety over love. I have been deaf for 5 years, Nora, but I have been truly alive for only the past 6 months, since the night you signed a warning to me in a crowded ballroom and gave me back the world. Nora looked up at him, seeing the absolute certainty in his eyes, and felt her carefully constructed defenses crumble. What are you asking me, William? His hands moved slowly, deliberately, forming the signs that would change everything. I am asking you to marry me. I am asking you to be my wife, my partner, my bridge to the world. I am asking you to stand beside me and face whatever comes, knowing that we face it together. Will you marry me, Nora?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and peril. Nora thought of Charlotte's threats, of Lady Beatrice's warnings, of the scandal that would surely follow such an unconventional marriage. She thought of her mother's cottage in Bath, of the safe, small life she could have if she refused. And then she thought of the past 6 months, of conversations in the library, of shared laughter, of the way William's face lit up when she entered a room. She thought of the connection they shared, forged in silence and signed in the air between them. She thought of the possibility of a life lived fully, courageously, authentically. She signed her answer, "Yes, yes, I will marry you." William pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were something precious and fragile. When he finally released her, his signs were shaky with emotion. "We will tell my aunt tomorrow. We will face Charlotte Pemberton and anyone else who objects. We will do this properly with dignity and courage. But tonight, let us simply be happy. Let us have this moment before the world intrudes." They sat together by the dying fire, hands intertwined, signing quiet promises and dreams for the future. Outside, the frost deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the small revolution taking place in the library of Ravenscroft Hall. A revolution that would challenge the rigid hierarchies of Edwardian England and prove that love, when it is true and brave, can bridge any divide. The announcement of the Duke of Ravenscroft's engagement to his interpreter sent shockwaves through English society that reverberated for months. Lady Beatrice, after an initial night of pacing and furious contemplation, surprised everyone by throwing her full support behind the match. "If my nephew has finally found happiness," she declared to the scandalized house party guests at breakfast, "then I will not stand in his way, regardless of what the gossips say. Miss Ashford has proven herself to be a woman of exceptional character, and William could do far worse than to marry someone who sees him as a man rather than a title." Charlotte Pemberton's reaction was less measured. She left Ravenscroft Hall that very morning, her departure marked by a tirade about propriety and the degradation of noble bloodlines that left even her ally, Mrs. Blackwood, embarrassed. True to her word, she spent the following weeks writing letters to every influential family she could think of, detailing the scandalous arrangement at Ravenscroft Hall and predicting social ruin for the Duke. The response was mixed. Some families expressed shock and disapproval, refusing future invitations to Ravenscroft Hall. Others, particularly those who had witnessed William's transformation from isolated recluse to engaged, active member of society, were more supportive. Several progressive-minded aristocrats even praised the match as evidence that the rigid class structures of Victorian England were finally beginning to soften in the new Edwardian age. The wedding took place in early December, a small ceremony in the chapel at Ravenscroft Hall, attended by close family and friends. Nora wore a simple gown of ivory silk, her dark blonde hair adorned with winter roses from the estate's greenhouse. William stood beside her in formal morning dress, his hands trembling slightly as he signed his vows, promises of love, partnership, and unwavering support that needed no voice to carry their weight. Nora's mother travelled from Bath for the occasion, her eyes filled with tears as she watched her daughter marry a duke. "Your father would have been so proud," she whispered to Nora before the ceremony. "Not because of the title, but because you found someone who loves you for exactly who you are." The months following the wedding were a period of adjustment and growth. Nora took on the role of Duchess of Ravenscroft with determination, studying estate management alongside William, learning the intricacies of household administration from Lady Beatrice, and gradually winning over the staff through her genuine kindness and her refusal to forget her own origins in service. She also began a project that would become her life's work, establishing a school for deaf children on the Ravenscroft estate. Using a portion of her own income and funds donated by sympathetic aristocrats, she created a place where children like her brother Thomas could receive education in sign language, lip reading, and practical skills that would allow them to support themselves as adults. William threw himself into the project with equal passion, designing curriculum and advocating for similar schools to be established throughout England. The school opened in the spring of 1909, with 12 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. Nora taught sign language classes herself, her hands moving through the familiar patterns that had once connected her to Thomas, now connecting her to a new generation of children who had been told they were defective, limited, less than whole. One afternoon in late May, nearly a year after the fateful ball where everything had begun, Nora stood in the schoolroom watching her students practice their signs. William entered quietly, coming to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. He signed, "What are you thinking about?" She signed back, "I'm thinking about how strange life is. A year ago, I was a lady's maid with no prospects, no future beyond a life of service. Now I am a duchess, running a school, married to a man I love beyond measure. Sometimes it feels like a dream. If it is a dream, then I hope never to wake." William signed, "You have given me back my life, Nora. You have shown me that my deafness is not a limitation, but simply a different way of experiencing the world. You have taught me that true communication goes far deeper than spoken words." "We have taught each other," Nora signed. "You showed me that I was capable of more than I ever imagined. You gave me the courage to step beyond the boundaries society had drawn around my life." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the children laugh and sign to each other, their hands moving in the language of hope and possibility. Outside the window, the Yorkshire moors stretched toward the horizon, green and gold in the spring sunlight, dotted with wildflowers that had pushed through the harsh soil to bloom where they were planted. News of Charlotte Pemberton filtered back to them occasionally through Lady Beatrice's correspondence. She had eventually married Lord Edmund Fairfax, the Baron who had supported her attack on Nora at the ball. By all accounts, it was a marriage of convenience rather than affection. Charlotte had secured her title and her position, but at the cost of binding herself to a man as rigid and joyless as herself. Lady Beatrice reported that Charlotte seemed perpetually dissatisfied, always comparing her circumstances to others, always grasping for more status, more recognition, more proof of her superiority. "I almost pity her," Nora signed to William when they heard that Charlotte had given birth to a son, but seemed more concerned with the child's potential inheritance than with his well-being. "She has everything she claimed to want: title, wealth, position. But she has no joy. She never learned that happiness cannot be achieved through status alone. Some people never learn that lesson," William signed. "They spend their entire lives chasing external validation, never understanding that true contentment comes from within, from living authentically and loving deeply." In the autumn of 1909, Nora discovered she was pregnant. The news filled Ravenscroft Hall with excitement and anticipation. Lady Beatrice immediately began planning for the nursery, while William alternated between joy and terror at the prospect of fatherhood. "What if I cannot hear the baby cry?" he signed to Nora one evening as they sat in the library. "What if I fail as a father because of my deafness?" Nora took his hands in hers, signing firmly, "You will not fail. We will find ways to adapt, just as we have adapted everything else. We will install visual signals in the nursery. We will teach our child to sign as soon as they can move their hands. We will create a family where communication flows in multiple directions. Your deafness does not make you less capable of being a wonderful father. It simply means we will parent differently than others might." Their daughter was born in May of 1910, a healthy, loud-voiced child with her father's grey eyes and her mother's determined expression. They named her Beatrice Thomasina Thornbury, Beatrice for William's aunt, who had supported them through scandal and social upheaval, and Thomasina in memory of Nora's brother, whose death had led to the knowledge that ultimately brought them together. Young Beatrice grew up bilingual, learning to sign before she could speak, moving fluidly between the hearing world and the deaf world with the ease of a child who knew no other way. She became the bridge between her parents and the wider world, but she was also simply their beloved daughter, raised in an atmosphere of love, learning, and the understanding that differences were not deficiencies, but simply variations in the human experience. The school for deaf children flourished, expanding to accommodate 30 students by 1912. Graduates went on to become teachers, craftsmen, shop owners, and clerks, productive members of society who had been given the tools to succeed, despite a world that often dismissed them as incapable. Nora's work attracted attention from educational reformers across England, and she was invited to speak at conferences and to advise other institutions on best practices for deaf education. William, meanwhile, became known as one of the most progressive landowners in Yorkshire, implementing innovative agricultural techniques, improving housing for his tenants, and advocating in the House of Lords for legislation to protect workers' rights and expand educational opportunities for the poor. His deafness, once seen as a shameful deficiency, became instead a symbol of his ability to overcome obstacles and to see the world from perspectives others might miss. On a warm afternoon in June of 1913, 5 years after the ball that had changed everything, Nora and William stood on the terrace of Ravenscroft Hall, watching their daughter play in the garden below. Beatrice was 3 years old now, chasing butterflies with the determined focus that characterized everything she did, her laughter carrying on the summer breeze. William signed to Nora. "Do you ever regret it? The scandal, the gossip, the challenges of being a duchess when you were raised as a servant?" Nora considered the question seriously, then signed her response. "I regret the pain it caused some people. Your aunt's worry, my mother's fear for my future, the discomfort of those who could not understand our choice. But I do not regret the choice itself. I have lived more fully in these 5 years than I could have in 50 years, of playing it safe, of staying within the boundaries society drew for me. I have loved and been loved. I have made a difference in the lives of children who needed someone to believe in them. I have built a partnership with you that is based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. How could I regret any of that? I love you." William signed simply. "I loved you from the moment you moved your hands in warning and gave me back my connection to the world. I will love you until my last breath, and beyond if such things are possible." "And I love you," Nora signed back. "You taught me that I was capable of more than I ever imagined. You showed me that true nobility has nothing to do with birth or title, and everything to do with character, courage, and the willingness to see the humanity in everyone we meet." They stood together in the golden afternoon light, hands intertwined, watching their daughter bloom in the garden of Ravenscroft Hall. Around them, the estate hummed with life. Tenants working in the fields, students learning in the school, servants going about their duties with the dignity of people who knew they were valued and respected. The world beyond Ravenscroft Hall continued to change, slowly and imperfectly, but change nonetheless. The rigid class structures of Victorian England were beginning to soften, challenged by people like William and Nora, who refused to accept that birth determined destiny, that deafness meant isolation, that love must bow to propriety. And in that moment, standing on the terrace with the man she loved and the life they had built together, Nora understood the truth that had eluded Charlotte Pemberton and so many others. That true happiness comes not from grasping for status or clinging to rigid hierarchies, but from having the courage to bloom where you are planted, to grow toward the light even when the soil is harsh, and to believe that love, patient, kind and brave, can transform even the most unlikely circumstances into something beautiful and enduring. The shy maid, who had once moved through the corridors of Ashworth Manor in practiced invisibility, had become the Duchess of Ravenscroft, a woman whose hands spoke volumes, whose courage challenged conventions, and whose love had proven that the language of the heart needs no voice to be heard. If you are listening to this story, do not forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled.